So in this presentation, we are going to try and quickly overview the station fire incident that happened at Camp 16 on Wednesday, August 26, 2009. We're going to go through it really quick. This program was designed for a presentation that stood alone as a review of the station fire and the serious accident that happened. It is not the actual report. If you're doing a report on this, or if you want to study it deeper, you need to get the accident report, the green sheet that was put together. You can find that on the internet, a PDF of it. We just want to look at this as an incident that is a great example to us how really good firefighters can make mistakes. This was an incident that had minor but extremely consequential mistakes. And by people that everybody I know that was involved in this were really excellent firefighters, people that I knew and highly respected. So let's get right to it. We're just going to provide an accident overview. That's what we're going to kind of go through and the sequence of events. So first of all, just a little bit about the kind of fire camp. It was an inmate fire camp. It opened in 1979 in the Angeles National Forest. It's located on a mountain ridge, about 5,600 feet. Kind of looks down on Tujunga area, Sunland. It was between the North Fork of Mill Creek and the Gleason Canyon drainage. Mount Gleason is about 1.5 miles due west of Camp 16. If you know where Mount Gleason is, it's right there above Tujunga. It was originally built as a Nike missile base during the Cold War, when we were deeply concerned that the Russians would fire missiles at us, and these were missiles that would fire back. So it was under the Army's command from 1956 to 1974, and there are a bunch of them. Quite a few of these old Nike missile bases got turned into fire camps. LA County, I don't know if they purchased them or what the process was. So it's important that you know that they were in a U.S. Forest Service area. That was their jurisdiction, even though it was an LA County camp. It's in the Angeles National Forest. And this is a fire progression map. You can look through this, but we're going to look at details on it. But most notable are the acres that were burnt on August 29th and August 30th. And those, the 29th is dark purple and the 30th is light purple. Between those 2 days, 57,160 acres. 2 is the highest acre consumption rates during single burn periods on record in the Angeles National Forest. So Camp 16 housed 105, sorry, I transposed that, inmate firefighters, and is one of 5 camps in a cooperative program between the LA County Fire Department and CDC, the California Department of Corrections. There were 6 fire crews with staffing of 1 LA County fire captain, which we would call a superintendent in LA County Fire. Then there were 10 firefighter specialists who, when they're in camp, they're called camp foremen. And of course, there were some CDC personnel, a lieutenant, a sergeant, and 7 officers. On Sunday, August 30th, the fire rapidly impacted Camp 16. And this is just a little overview. We're going to go in detail of the sequence of events here in a sec. But at 4:45 in the afternoon, 16:45, it hit the camp, burned throughout the camp, 300-foot flame lengths were seen. It was an intense burn. Every building in camp burned to the ground. And at there was a vehicle accident. Whether they drove off and then burned, or whether they were burned and that caused them to drive off, we don't know. But a vehicle accident. There was shelter deployment in the camp, and multiple personnel that were minor injuries, but the most serious part, the burnover, contributed to 2 LA County Fire personnel dying in the vehicle accident. 13 others had minor injuries. Chief Freeman had contacted Cal Fire Chief Del Waters on August 31st to ask for his assistance after the incident at Cab 16, and Cal Fire sent a serious accident review team, and it was activated, and they did a after action report, did all of the investigations. So Saturday, just a little sequence of events here. One of the things to understand is that, well, I'm going to get to that later. Never mind. On Saturday morning, Crew 16-6 was assigned to LA Camp 14 in San Francisco Canyon. Crews 16-3 and 16-4 were out of the area on another fire. So Superintendent Hall and the camp foreman and the CDC staff met that morning at Camp 16 and discussed a plan to protect the camp from the approaching station fire. So they made assignments, and they had a discussion, and they, initiated action on, okay, they set forth a sequence of events. If this happens, then we'll do this. If this happens, then we'll do that. So they established what would be like their trigger points, as we've talked about. Now, Superintendent Hall, first of all, Ted Hall is somebody I knew not real well, but I knew him by reputation, and we never really worked together a lot, but I always thought Ted was one of the really good ones. He was an excellent superintendent, had an excellent reputation, and he was taking charge. And on Saturday, he was in contact with the battalion chief, and they discussed a firing out plan where they would burn out the area where the fire was coming towards the camp, so that as the fire burned in, there would be a backfire going towards the fire, and hopefully that would lessen the impact to the camp. And they set up trigger points, and what they were going to do is, the fire approached the bottom of the drainage below Camp 16, they would start their firing out operations. And with backfiring, timing is very important. And so they discussed that whole timing. They had requested 2 additional fire engines to assist with protecting the camp, and engines 131 and engine 80 were assigned. So Superintendent Hall and his foreman patrolled, and they watched the fire throughout the night into the early morning hours on Sunday morning, and they kept their eyes out where the fire was as it continued to approach. So 131s and 80s had showed up, and they gave them assignments and discussed the plan with them as well. So on Sunday, you can see that it progressed heavily. So at approximately 1100 on 8/30, Firewatch 509 flew over the area on a recon mission and attempted to contact the personnel at Camp 16, but they were unable to communicate because they were on different frequencies, and he couldn't share with them his view of the fire. If he had, it would have been very helpful. The information regarding the status of the camp didn't make it to the incident management team. They did not know what was going on at Camp 16. This is very important that everybody understand that as the this spotter plane went by, that they did not get the information to the station fire IC, and the IC didn't even know what was going on at Camp 16 because the county fire guys just tried to handle it themselves. So at 11:30, uh, uh, the camp's foreman looked out at Lightning Point Ridge, which is what they called it, and they could see that the fire was cresting that point and knew that it was coming quickly. So about this same time, Superintendent Hall and the battalion chief called for an additional briefing. They got the company officers from 131s and 80s and the CDC officers, and they rediscussed the plan. So this was not a situation where they didn't have a plan. That's very important that you understand that. And they had trigger points. But there are a few things in the plans that were neglected that cost them immensely later on. And we'll discuss those in a second. So you can see this close-up of Lightning Point Ridge and the fire cresting photograph that was taken around that time. Now, Patrol 80 ended up arriving at Camp 16, and they were just out on patrol, and it had a captain and a firefighter in it, and they ended up retaining them to help them in their efforts. They said, hey, we need you to stay. So at approximately 1500 hours, Patrol 80 started to pre-treat areas around the camp with Class A foam. And at about 3:30 in the afternoon, Superintendent Hall and the battalion chief again had a discussion while observing the fire about the plan. Now, Superintendent Hall explained to the battalion chief that the camp is broken up into 4 sections, with the foreman as a lookout, and described the assignments for the different engines. So they had lookouts for the camp. That's important you understand that. They had lookouts for the camp, but they did not have a lookout for the firing operation. They didn't assign someone to that. So Engine 80 personnel, they were putting out this Class A foam, which, by the way, in this situation, didn't help at all. Didn't help at all. I'm a big fan of Class A foam, but as you'll see in the photographs of the fire, it was way more than what the Class A foam could make a difference. They had a great sense of confidence in their plan, and so at 3:30, Superintendent Hall explained there was going to be a fire operation on the road below the camp, and that the remainder of the staff and the inmates were going to stay sheltered in the dining hall. Superintendent Hall explained to the battalion chief that they would let the fire burn through the camp and then extinguish any hot spots that resulted from, spotting, any embers that would fall on roofs and any of that kind of thing that they were, expecting, but not to the intensity of what happened. So at 4:10, 131s and 80s were at their assigned locations, and then at 4:13, they saw that the fire was on the east side of the ice patch. So this is the last hillside right before it goes down into the drainage below Camp 16. So it's kind of a local designation on Mount Gleason Road, about 1 mile west of the camp. So at 4:25, Ted Hall and Arnie Quinones went down to do the firing operation on the access road below the camp, and I'll show you a photograph of that in a sec. So here's the ice patch before the fire hit it, and I don't know, must have got that nickname because that's one of the places that wouldn't melt as soon. They just called it ice patch, and you can see the fire here was cresting the hill. When you see the GPS the Google Earth photograph, and you'll see that the configuration of the drainage, they were expecting the fire to come up and over ice patch, down, and then hit the bottom of the drainage and come up. And you'll see that it came at them a different way than what they were expecting. Also, you need to remember they were not a part of the station fire incident plan. They didn't even know that the fire was impacting them. So they didn't get the weather reports and the updates. They didn't know at Camp 16 what was going on with the fire. They didn't know at the Station Fire Incident Command what was going on at Camp 16. I just wanted to remind you that as we move into this last little part here. So, several minutes later, they drove the patrol down west of the helipad, and they went to turn around. So they parked the vehicle below the helipad, and again, you'll see the Google Earth looking down on that here in a second, and it'll help you envision this. And they were facing east. So Foreman Quinones was seen preparing a drip torch. Superintendent Hall started to shoot rounds from the Very pistol, and this was to be the fire. So they were going to be a backfire, and then there was going to be a fire in between the fire coming at them, and then they would all come together. So they were working on that, and the captain from Patrol 80 kind of self-assigned himself to be a lookout and was watching them. And he went on the radio and tried to communicate to Ted Hall and said, "You've got fire behind you. You've got fire below you. You need to get out of there." And they couldn't see it from their perspective, and they didn't hear what the captain from Patrol 80 was saying. So here's a photograph, and the helipad's up here. And if you look at this road, it goes, here's an intern. So that's a draw. That's a chimney right there, a serious chimney. And then the road here towards the east, and it comes around and would have brought them back to camp. So they were planning on this being their escape route. What they did not find out or realize until later was that the fire was hitting the east side before the west side, so their escape route was cut off. So you can see that there's a 90% southwest facing slope. This is just the concrete shell of the buildings that was left afterwards. All of those pine trees you saw on the outside of camp, all burned, except for this one. And here's the road where they were going to use as their escape route. As I said, Superintendent 16 didn't answer the captain over the radio. Apparently, they were on different frequencies. Or he just didn't hear the transmission. The captain from Patrol 80 repeated his radio message and observed that Ted Hall got in the vehicle and he started driving further east, but still below the helipad. And Foreman Quinones was on foot behind the vehicle lighting fire with the drip torch. So they were doing their firing operation. Then he repeated his warning again by yelling and blowing a whistle, trying to warn of the fire's progress. The captain from Patrol 80 recalls seeing both Superintendent Hall and Quinones moving to the vehicle as if preparing to leave the area. So they might have heard the whistle, or observed the same thing finally that the captain from Patrol 80 was seeing. But they did go to the vehicle. At that point, and it's about 1.5, let me go back here. It's about 1.5 mile from the fork in the road to the fork of the road at the entrance of the camp, where Superintendent 16 would have returned to the camp. So this is about 1/2 mile here. So at the point of their final transmission, the fire and the wind was really loud, and the fire was raging up this chimney and this hillside, and they were trying to escape basically into the head of the fire. So at 4:30, the camp foreman, who also acted as a self-appointed lookout, gave a radio report that the fire was impacting the north end of the camp. At 4:31, the camp crews were sent to the dining hall. At 4:43, there was a transmission on the radio from Superintendent Hall where he said over the radio, "Keep the road clear, oh shit, oh shit." And they had to drive into the fire. We don't know if they drove off the road because they couldn't see or if the fire impacted them and they died from the fire, from the superheated gases, and then the vehicle went off the road. We don't know. But that was the final transmission from Superintendent Hall and Foreman Quinones. And this is where they drove off, up right near where they would have turned and entered the camp. By 4:48, Engine 80 had to abandon their structure protection assignment, and Engine 80 was at the far west end of the camp trying to protect the barracks, but the barracks were on fire and all of those pine trees were on fire. And as the fire impacted the camp, they were forced to retreat into the barracks. And then eventually they had to run out of the barracks back into their vehicle, move their vehicle. There was some photographs that I'm going to show you. 300-foot flame lengths were observed, and they considered the area total area ignition. Just everything that could catch fire was on fire. So here's some photographs that were taken shortly before they had to totally evacuate. And as you can imagine, visibility was slim, and the buildings that they were supposed to protect were on fire. They had to go inside to shelter in place, and then realized that was no longer safe to be in there. And then they came back out to their vehicle, moved their vehicle with barely any visibility, and fortunately moved far enough away to where they were safe. Here's a photograph of, you can see the flames are way above the pine trees, the top of the pine trees. And as I said, 300-foot flame lengths were observed. At 4:48, they abandoned their structure. They moved to the south. They moved to the north side of the camp and went over near the dining hall. Engine 131 were also facing great difficulty in their efforts to defend the dining hall. The roof of the dining hall caught fire, and they had to retreat to the dining area with the rest of the crews. And this is, a few more of the photographs that were taken as things really went bad. And this one is one of the most telling. Just everything was on fire, and all of these trees burned. At 4:44, there were so many spot fires around the compound. A few minutes later, there was the radio transmission advising the dorm roof was completely engulfed and that it was no longer a safe place to shelter. So they got out their fire shelters and they were going to leave the building. The order was given to evacuate the inmates from the dining hall to the crew carriers that were positioned away from the advancing fire. One of the foremen left the dining hall and got the crew carriers closer, and they said that visibility was 5 feet. So everyone was loaded into the crew carrying vehicles, and they used their fire shelters to shelter them from the heat as they got into the crew cabs. At 5:06, the battalion chief requested a personnel accountability report. Everybody was accounted for except for Superintendent Hall and Arnie Quinones. The BC ordered an immediate search of the camp, but things were so hot it was really difficult to do. You can see here the crew cabs. Here there's some melting of the The lights, you can see some of the fire shelters that were used. Notice that the fire shelters are melted. Um, so the heat was extremely intense. They start to fail at 1,000 degrees. So it was probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000 that it was starting to melt and they're scorched. There were no actual deployments where they got in their shelters. They just used them to shield themselves, and many of them had damage or holes. At 5:07, the battalion chief contacted command and control and reported that they were missing. At about 5:30, 131 approached the location where the vehicle truck was observed over the edge of the road. They, put forward a heroic effort um, to get to them, hopefully to save them, but uh, they communicated that they were lost, that there were no survivors. This is where they went over the road and rolled all the way down, and here is um, what was left of their vehicle. They traveled 600 feet into the uh, the drainage. They impacted a rock outcropping, flipping forward over onto its top. The CHP report indicates that personnel were most likely unconscious due to the fire impact before they left the roadway. There was no way to turn around. Both directions were impacted by the fire. And as you can see, nobody could survive this. So at 2000 later that day, a task force of rescue resources arrived at 11:45 that night. The coroner was there. Next morning, 3:03, they brought up one of the bodies, draped in an American flag, and at 4:16, the other body was brought up. All resources were released from the scene at 0600 hours. And this is a picture you never want to see, right? Fallen firefighter, you know, being removed with respect, and but everybody that was there is never going to forget that day. So, some of the findings. Okay, what did we learn from it? So I know this has been going long already, but we need to just kind of talk about some of these things. No communications between the command and general staff of the station fire, the incident command, and the personnel at Camp 16. They didn't even know what was going on. So personnel from Camp 16 did not attend any of the station fire briefings, and they didn't know about the weather, and they didn't know that this was pyrocumulus driven on these 2 days of the 29th and the 30th. Firewatch 509 was not able to communicate to them and give them information on the approaching fire. Well, because they were on different frequencies. Tactical communications at Camp 16 were on 2 different frequencies on 2 different bands. This is part of the problem why some of the people who were from the engine companies were trying to communicate to Superintendent Hall. Well, camp crews and engine crews are on different frequencies. And during their planning, nobody said, hey, we need a tactical frequency. What are we going to communicate to each other on? This was an easily overlooked issue, but became extremely critical as to why they didn't know sooner about what was happening. They probably could have escaped if they heard that first warning. So they had the face-to-face briefings. They did have a plan. This was a plan that had been set forth by fire crews many years before. What if a fire came this way? What would we do? And they went with that well-oiled, well-discussed plan, but when it came to actually implementing it, one of the failures was they didn't have a common communication tactical frequency. Um, there was not adequate time to complete the firing operation, and it was due to the changing fire conditions. And you'll see a photograph later on of the pyrocumulus formation that increased the fire intensity. And also, this was during a time of our ongoing drought that's been going on for about 30 years now. The only plausible escape route for the firing team was to the south on Mount Gleason Road, but there were no escape routes identified from Camp 16. Um, they had confidence in their plan. They had good leadership. They just had a couple of holes in the plan. And that's something that I want you all to think about is everybody should, you know, when you're having these briefings, make sure you understand. And if you think to yourself, hey, what frequency are we on? You should say that. But apparently nobody thought of it. And it's easy in these situations to have that one little thing that gets missed. And there were a couple. They didn't know about the weather conditions. They knew about the weather. They didn't know about the pyrocumulus situation that was increasing the speed of the fire. Those 2 days, as we already saw, the intensity of the fire created the pyrocumulus formation, which made the fire spread way faster than anybody would expect. The actual fire behavior exceeded what was expected when it impacted the camp. The plan to defend the camp didn't evolve with the fire behavior. And also, there was a little bit of topography issues that were not considered. The time of day with the aspect also increased the intensity of the spread, and that apparently was not taken into account. The firing operation either should have started sooner or maybe even from a different direction or with more than one team. So the plan was a good plan, but had a couple of holes, and it had to do with communication and weather, especially. They were not aware of the changing weather conditions due to the pyrocumulus. Um, there were some individuals that didn't have fire shelter training that were there, some of the CDC people, and that was significant. But the most important part is that, you know, these two were in a place where they couldn't escape fast enough. They all the people, Superintendent 16 had all the proper training. Everybody else had proper training. There was an issue with Engine 80 where he had some difficulty getting into pump from pump to drive while attempting to retreat to a safer location. And sometimes that's just a mechanical thing. Who knows? So, fire behavior analysis. Why did the fire come so much faster than expected? Well, there was an upper level high pressure system that was in place for a few days leading up to August 30th. And they had triple digit temperatures. The humidity was single digits. And the fire weather watch issued on the 25th was later upgraded to a red flag warning on the 26th. So the plume dominated fire behavior is what really impacted things. NASA imagery on August 30th indicated pyrocumulus development at all the way as 23,000 feet in elevation over the fire, that this big, huge fire formation, pyrocumulus formation. And here's a photo of that. So you can see that it was just intense, rapid spread. And on here was the burn index on the most important days, but leading up to was very high as well. Now, this is what I was talking about, is here's the camp up here, and they were expecting the fire to come at this angle, go up and then back down and then come up. But because of wind and intensity, it did do that, but it also went in the drainage here. And then as it came into the drainage, this burned instead of up and over. The fire went this way in the drainage, and then, of course, that intensity created a chimney going this way and going this way into the camp. And this was the one that really burned quickly, and then here's where they drove off, right here. So topography, and of course the fuel was very dry. They hadn't had a fire in this area in a very long time. In the next photograph, you can see how thick the brush was, but the fire came into the drainage this way, as well as it didn't come down here as they expected. It came in and then up and up. And you can see, look at how steep all of this is. See how thick the brush was? And the fire here is burning opposite. So due to the lack of fire history, the fuel load was just massive. So you put all of those things together. Remember how we talked about with alignment, it's all about exponential growth. It's not just 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. It's 2 × 2 × 2 = 8, right? 2 × 2 is 4, times 2 is 8. So it's more than what you expect. So here's, the fire in the distance from the camp. So some of the heavy fuels. No record of fire history in the area. The fuel loading was 40 tons. Fuel moistures were at a critical low. Live fuel moistures were estimated at 55%. Dead fuel moistures 2 to 4%. I mean, that's not mostly dead. That's dead. So slopes on the south side of Mount Gleason Road below the camp ranged from 50 to 80%, with an average slope of 70. The south slope between the camp and the Mount Gleason Road averaged 90%. It was southwest facing. Hear all these things that are building up towards alignment behavior? So we've got the worst kind of aspect at the worst time of day, with extreme slope, with extremely heavy fuels that are extremely dead, extreme, therefore extreme fire behavior above and beyond expectation. And on top of that, there was a saddle which kind of sucks and allows for the air, and it acts like a funnel. So causal factors. Let's get to the conclusions here. The decision to protect Camp 16 and shelter in place and allow the firing operation was made at the battalion chief's management level, but without contact to the station incident management team. That was a mistake, but the plan and talking to the chief, these were right things. Not contacting the station incident management team was a wrong thing. The lack of contact with station incident prevented Camp 16 leadership from knowing about predicted fire behavior and available resources. They could have sent more resources to help them out. The firing operation on the Mount Gleason Road was not successful due to the extreme fire behavior, which exceeded the prediction of the plan. Okay, that's important to understand. They didn't put together all of the pieces of the speed that the fire would approach. The organizational culture, part of this was, hey, this is our house. We're going to protect our house. There's that sense of ownership. So maybe that influenced the decision that we're going to stay and defend our home. We're not going to just let the fire come in here and burn it. And maybe affected their lack of contacting somebody else and asking for help from the station incident management team because they said, hey, we can do this. This is our house. We'll protect it. The fire burned in a rugged terrain, and the burnover occurred at the upper end of a steep drainage with fuel loads at seasonal low fuel moisture levels. We already said that. And the resources assigned to Camp 16 were using different frequencies. The engine frequency and the camp frequencies are different for tactical discussions. And that was a big problem. So effective communication controls were not in effect. So now, the recommendation team consisted of 3 camp superintendents, 3 battalion chiefs, 2 local 1014, the union representatives, Chief Deputy Tripp, and they got together and assessed all of this. And this is what they came up with. Communication was a problem, right? Utilize communications equipment and procedures appropriately. We need to make sure we're on the right frequency. They LA County Fire was going to go through and review all of their plans for how to protect their facilities, and that some of this is stuff that the department decided to do. But I wanted to show you these last 2 photos. This is Arnie Quinones, 8-year veteran. By the way, his wife was pregnant. He had been a call firefighter for 3 years prior to being on the fire department. So he had 11 years fire experience. And he was assigned as the crew foreman to Camp 16. And Ted Hall, he was a 26-year veteran. He worked as a student worker 2 years before that. So he had 28 years with LA County Fire Department. Again, I can't tell you how much respect Ted had, and his reputation was really impeccable. A great guy. And he was the camp superintendent at Camp 16. This is a tragedy that you all need to remember. The reason I always bring this one up is because even good firefighters can make little mistakes that compound to become critical mistakes. Hey, I can't tell you how many times I made a little mistake here or there that fortunately didn't turn out to be disasters. We're all human. We got to remember the human factor. So everybody on the team needs to speak up if they see something. See something, say something. Ask questions of your captains. You don't show disrespect, show respect, but ask questions. If you don't understand part of the plan, say, sir, I'm not sure I understand that. What are we going to do? And if you see something that is maybe a little bit of a hole in the plan, say something. Nobody thought to say, hey, what frequency are we on? And unfortunately, nobody thought to say, hey, does the station fire incident command team, do they know what's going on here? Are they going to send us any resources? So hopefully you learned from this. I'm sorry it was a little longer than I wanted it to be, but this is really important that we learn from prior mistakes, prior situations. Sometimes it's just the fire does what the fire does, and we just happen to be in the way. And that kind of was partly the situation here. This fire was more intense, more, better way to say it, had a greater extreme fire behavior than anybody expected. But part of that was misunderstood because they didn't communicate with the incident management team. Okay, that's enough. Hey, thanks for watching this, and make sure that you turn in your station fire fatality study, and you should be able to get all the answers from what we talked about.